The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So the World Cup is over. Biggest embarrassment from the World Cup was the participation of Russia, given that 28 players were caught doping, but FIFA, in its infinite corruption, realized we can't really ban the team that's hosting the World Cup, so we're going to say that the evidence was not completely conclusive and allow them to continue participating. After that, the embarrassing performance of the Argentinian team was probably number 2 on the list, at least for me. And ultimately, the winner is France. The last time France won the World Cup was 1998. Former producer Lewis was 14 years old at the time and was in France at the time of the World Cup and described it as absolute and utter craziness. It has been 20 years since France won the World Cup, and they have won again. And I believe this was their second World Cup win, tying them with a bunch of teams. Argentina has 2 World Cup wins. I don't know, some other teams.
Yeah, Brazil has the most, I think, with 5. And
5
then
or
from
6,
there,
yeah.
you have like Italy. Germany has quite a few. So
Right.
I think there are about 7 or 8 teams who have won the World Cup. That's it. And it's only been going on since the 1930s, but still, you'd expect more variety there.
You would, yeah. Well, it's only every 4 years. And
Yeah.
as soon as 5 teams win a second one and it's only every 4 years, that pretty drastically reduces the number of teams that have won it.
That's why I was rooting for Croatia. They're a small country, only 4 million people. This was their chance to do it, right? That's not going to happen again to them.
Who knows, but I was not rooting for Croatia. I was rooting for France. I just root for countries that I like, that I visited, and that I have some personal connection to. And I've been to France a couple of times. I have cousins in France. I like French culture. I like French food. So I went with France. And Croatia, I'm sure, is absolutely lovely. And I actually, in a year and a half, I'm going to a wedding in Italy on the Croatian border.
Yep.
And so my plan is to go into Croatia at that time, and I may end up liking it better than France. And in a future Croatia-France World Cup, I might be rooting for Croatia. Who knows? But at least for now, I was rooting for France. France, the notably better team during the game yesterday, and ultimately, I think the correct team won.
Yeah, that's probably true, but I'm just surprised that the underdog thing doesn't really appeal to you. Like I said, Croatia, 4 million people versus France with 67 million people, and France has won it before.
Sure.
I like to see the team that has never done it before pull it off.
Yeah.
I think it's a cool success story.
Sure.
It makes people more interested in that small country.
If I have no connection to either of the participants, then I tend to go for the underdog. But in this case, I do have, several years of history and connections to France. So it it superseded the underdog component, or at least for me.
What do you think about the protesters running onto the field?
So at a certain point, Pussy Riot protesters ran onto the field, and I know that in American sports, it's very common that, including baseball, which is one of the more common ones where people run onto the field because it just, there's hours and hours of people just standing around, that they usually cut away and they don't show the protesters because they don't want to encourage other protesters with the idea that they might get the glory of being on television, so they usually cut away immediately. During the game, while the game was in play, Pussy Riot protesters ran onto the field and interfered with the game, so there was no way to cut away immediately. Only when the referee blew the whistle and stopped play did they eventually cut away to not show the protesters. So you actually saw the protesters on live television, which is... Listen, if you're in the game of trying to protest in this way, they did it right because usually you don't make it onto TV.
Yeah, you were able to see it for a few split seconds there, but very risky thing to do, not just anywhere. Like if that happened here, if someone ran on the field during a Red Sox game, maybe they'll put you in jail overnight. You may have to pay a small fine, that sort of thing, right?
Is it that little of a fine?
Maybe a few $1,000s. So maybe not insignificant, but nothing that's going to ruin the rest of your life, right?
Sure.
If you're doing this in Russia, I'd have to imagine they end up in some prison camp somewhere, right? And the consequences are very severe.
Are you suggesting that Russia is an authoritarian regime that is harshly punishing people in extrajudicial ways that Americans wouldn't approve of?
Yeah, or maybe they just get manipulated to the point where they shoot themselves in the back 10 times or poison themselves accidentally.
It's crazy the frequency with which protesters from Pussy Riot end up accidentally falling onto a knife 10 times and then subsequently out of a window. It's unbelievable the bad fortune of accidents that they end up having.
And Putin was at the game. He must have felt embarrassed. I'm kind of worrying about these protesters.
I actually, we're joking, but I actually also am very worried about it. But overall, I hate that the World Cup was in Russia. I hate even more arguably that it's in Qatar next time, an actual slave state where people are building the facilities that are effectively indentured servants or slaves who have had their passports taken from them. I hate it but I love the World Cup.
Yeah, I'm glad I can stop pretending to care about soccer for another 4 years now.
Yeah.
Until the next one rolls around.
After the World Cup, when I tried to watch a game of the Red Sox recently. It's just so dull. It's just so dull because number one, in the World Cup, every game means something, right? You in the group stage, you lose 2 games and you're basically out. So very quickly, every game means something. After that, it's all single elimination. You play 162 games in the baseball season, and the games drag on with very few minutes of actual action, right? If you eliminate the time between pitches and you eliminate all the pitches that don't result in an out or some kind of result, right? Just foul balls, strikes that don't result in an out. There's almost no action in baseball. And it's just very difficult when the World Cup is going on and when it ends for me to go back to watching baseball. And usually they coincide seasonally, right? Because it's in the summer. It's very difficult. Baseball is one of those sports that's always in the background, right? Because it runs from April to October. Sure. So if something else is going on, that takes the priority. I will say that is absolutely the way I'm experiencing it. There is a new reality show on True TV that wants to cash in on the fact that people are being crushed by student loans, and it is a program called Paid Off. It's going to be a trivia show where contestants will participate and compete to have their student loan debt taken care of. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but not really, because we know that student loan debt is crushing so many people. It's making it so that people stay in jobs that they hate because they need to continue paying off student loan debt, with the exception that in some cases, if you don't have an income, you can ask for the repayment of student loan debt to be delayed without interest in some cases, whatever. It's actually horrifying that this is this is almost like people talk about Breaking Bad, and they say something along the lines of, only in America would this even be a premise that makes sense, which is that a teacher needs to start cooking meth because of medical expenses. That in so many other countries, the premise would never allow the show to get off the ground because it wouldn't be believable that somebody would need to start selling meth to pay medical expenses. Only in a country where the student loan debt is this crushing would it make sense to have a game show where if you win, you get your student loans paid.
Yeah, but what do you think about the game show itself? Like, I think it sounds a little bit exploitative, right? Of course. They're capitalizing on this student debt crisis.
They are, but they actually might pay off some people's student loans. So isn't that a good thing?
I guess that's the counter, that while not everyone's student loans can be paid off, at least a few people will get their student loans paid off. I don't know, like if there was this bill being pushed to forgive student loans and lower interest rates, for example, would the network in charge of this lobby against that proposition?
I don't think TV networks get involved in that type of lobbying. I don't know. I think it's mostly the lending companies and other parts of that student lending industrial complex apparatus. I don't think, listen, these reality shows and game shows are so cheap to produce that the show would just say, hey, we got a season or 2 out of it and we'll move on to something else that will get equally okay enough ratings to make us money.
Yeah, I guess the point is that they have a financial incentive to keep the crisis going.
Sure.
And that perturbs me in some way. And I just wouldn't want to support a show like that. It just doesn't seem right.
I plan not to watch
Sounds like
this
the Hunger
show.
Games, you know?
In a sense, it is. But they could move on to a game show where contestants are lobbying to or competing to have their medical debts paid off, right? I mean, like that'll continue being a problem even if we fix student loan debt, which, by the way, there's no indication we're about to fix.
I feel like maybe this goes to like behavioral economics, which you talk about a lot too. If you were on a show and had the chance to, get your $50,000 student loan debt forgiven, and you lost, you'd be far more upset than had you had the chance to win $50,000 and lost. You know what I mean?
Because you did have the chance to win 50.
Well, like if you start at zero.
If you start at zero, okay,
and
right.
can win $50,000 versus you're tied down by student loans, and you have to pay these bills every month because you owe $50,000.
Yeah.
I would be a lot more upset that I lost that game show versus the one where I had just a chance to win.
So if you had the opportunity to go from owing 50 to zero versus the opportunity of going from zero to having 50, losing the opportunity to pay off your debt, I'm not sure. I think behavioral economics, people are it's loss aversion that people are often motivated by. And I'm trying to think, losing 50, you would end up with zero if someone pays off your $50 loan, whereas you would end up with $50,000 if you just won $50,000. So I actually think people might be more negatively affected by losing out on getting 50 grand rather than having their loans paid off.
How would you feel?
I don't know.
I think I'd feel worse if I had the
I
chance to have that 50,000 forgiven and I
think
lost
I'd feel
and I
the
got the question
same.
wrong.
I think I'd feel the same, which is the mathematically rational thing to feel.
That's good.
I have no idea. Okay, speaking of debt, Brett Kavanaugh, Trump's Supreme Court nominee, according to financial disclosures, he has between $60,000 and $200,000 in debt across 3 credit cards and a loan. And what we have found out is that a lot of this has to do with him purchasing baseball tickets, that he was regularly spending big money to see the Washington Nationals baseball team. I guess Brett Kavanaugh is a big fan of that team. And what has ultimately been revealed is that Brett Kavanaugh, was buying tickets for a ton of people, for himself and others. And as far as we know, the others were reimbursing him. And this is actually a story that has the miles and points world, which is the world that seeks to maximize credit card bonuses for meeting minimum spending requirements. I'm like marginally connected to this. Like I followed The Points Guy, which is one of the big publications that talks to you about how to get the most out of frequent flyer miles and credit card sign-up bonuses and all this stuff. And they're all over the Brett Kavanaugh story because it violates one of the terms and conditions of a lot of these programs, which is you can't be buying stuff for other people that they then reimburse you for. That's not really the spirit of it. The idea is if you get 1 mile per dollar spent or 2 points per dollar spent or whatever, it has to be your spending. You can't basically be a purchasing apparatus for things that are for other people. I don't know if anything will ultimately ever come of it, but it appears as though Brett Kavanaugh was on the wrong side of the norms of the miles and points frequent flyer game or something like that.
Yeah, that's so weird. And he has all this debt because of it too.
Yeah.
His net worth is apparently only somewhere from $15,000 to $60,000, which I have a really tough time believing unless he has a spending problem.
Yeah.
Because as a U.S. judge, he makes about $200,000 a year and will get a slight raise if he becomes a Supreme Court justice. So
Yeah.
how could his net worth be so little?
A lot of times that can be an on-paper thing where he might be highly leveraged, like in real estate investments, for example, or something like that, where he might have significant cash flow, but on paper he has debts that are not necessarily, sometimes in order to be able to go really into debt, it's kind of a position of privilege. Like there was this controversy when Hillary Clinton said, I'm sort of a regular person. I have $8 million in debt or something like that, something crazy for my campaign or who knows what. In order to get $8 million in debt, you actually have to be in a pretty privileged position because you would not be likely to be able to go so into debt unless you had some reason why somebody would extend that much credit to you in the first place. So yeah, I haven't looked at Kavanaugh's entire finances, but he seems to be running opposite what the frequent flyer and credit card mile and reward credit cards want you to be doing, and who knows what's going to be the outcome of it.
Yeah, I wonder if Democrats will make a point of this, right? Is all this financial stuff personal and they can't ask questions about it, or they shouldn't ask questions about it, or
Right.
does he, could this prevent him from going on the bench or maybe delay the confirmation hearings until after the midterms?
The way this is sometimes made political is by saying that anybody who is in a fragile economic position might be liable to accept cash bribes or to be influenced in some way. And I believe that it was Marco Rubio who had some issues related to a mortgage and maybe even student loan debt. The details of it are escaping me now. And that was one of the things that Trump was saying, right? Nobody can buy me because I have so much money. And of course, we've since found out that the guy is actually, despite whatever amount of money he actually has, he really still seems to want to grab more at any opportunity, even relatively small amounts of money. So it didn't seem like it wasn't a good argument then, and it's still not a good argument now. And I think that would be the political argument against Kavanaugh, which is if his finances are this precarious, we should be worried about sitting as one of 9 votes, voting very often on whether a corporation is going to be able to allow to do X or Y or not. When the corporations might have billions of dollars riding on it, it wouldn't be a lot for a corporation to try to slide him a couple million bucks.
Yeah, I mean, if Trump wanted a speedy confirmation process, he should have picked a different justice. I think McConnell wanted, some picks that had less controversy in their past, right? And because, there are many things you can point to with, like, the Ken Starr, what's his name, the person
Ken
who
Starr
investigated
Special Investigation,
Bill Clinton.
yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
his,
with all that
title was.
stuff, and I guess this financial concern, there could be a chance that these confirmation hearings drag on for a long time.
We can hope so. Yeah, the Ken Starr thing, for people who don't know, is that Brett Kavanaugh worked with Ken Starr investigating Bill Clinton, and now has the position that presidents shouldn't be burdened with investigations. He, of course, says, well, I realized why it was wrong after working for Ken Starr. It's true. He's on record as having said that, but it is quite a glaring change in his position on that issue. Send me your thoughts. Will this hold up the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings? I don't think this will, but I'm hoping that Democrats will find other ways to hold it up. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.